when you install your remote transmission cooler, you basically mount it. You run two of these lines here. So if you look at my old torque converter and the new torque converter, you'll notice there's a space below the tab. So here we are with the last piece of the puzzle for the Trailblazer build. What we're looking at here is, drum roll, the PerformaBuilt 4L70E. Supposed to be able to handle up to 900 horsepower. They do quite a bit of work with 4L60s. Certainly do a lot of work with the 4L80s, TH400s, those kinds of things. But for this build, I decided to go with the 4L70 just because I really don't feel like doing a swap, and I don't plan on making that much horsepower to necessitate a built 4L80. But you never know, this thing could turn out to be a drag car somewhere down the road. But for now, that's not what it's going to be used for. So how does this thing come and what do we get with it? So the transmission comes as is. It is basically sent to your house in a giant bag with some pig mats underneath it to soak up any transmission fluid. It's placed nicely in this box with foam. Then it's got a bag of foam on it, and it's got another protective layer. And it comes with an external cooler. It comes with gasket. This gasket here for the, I believe that's for the tail shaft, which looks, this is the one that I had a hard time with getting it to seal. But anyway, new dipstick thing. Don't know what this is, but I'm gonna find out. External cooler comes with their sticker, and then they gave me a packet of instructions to follow. So if you do order that from them, make sure you read that packet. It has a lot of good information. So what I have to do now is, I'm not going to remove the old fittings from my transmission that were here. I'm actually going to run a aftermarket lines, and I'm going to use a external cooler with its own fan. So it's going to be a little bit larger than this with its own fan. So it's going to be a pretty solid standalone cooling system for this. I had a bad experience with the integrated radiator cooling with this Trailblazer, so I will never do that again. I don't have a converter out here, but I do have a built converter. I think it's a 3200 stall, and that's also going to be going in. So plan to package this thing together, fit it on, get the clearances between the flex plates and the torque converter, and by that time hopefully I can start tossing this thing in. Waiting on some parts for this, and hopefully this thing goes together here very shortly. So as you can see here in front of me, I have my transmission, my wonderfully new and painted transmission, and my disgustingly old bell housing and tail shaft attached. So the very next thing that has to happen is we have to put the torque converter in, and then put the transmission in, set the transmission, put on the crossbar, so I can start working on the spacing and clearances of the downpipe and the front mount for the Trailblazer. So before we do that, a couple of things that we are going to do. First and foremost, we are going to lube up the O-ring here. And for the torque converter, I'm going to go ahead and lube it up and add 1 quart of automatic trans fluid into it before we put that guy in there, and then ultimately set it underneath the car and get it in place. Make sure to get the lube on there pretty good so you don't tear up the seal. And then put some on here as well. It looks like it already came with some lube on it, but just for good measure, I'm going to go ahead and put some on there. Right. And I am using the Dexron 6, which is what is recommended. Now what's interesting is PerformaBuilt states in their manual to use Dexron 3 or better. I went ahead and gave them a call. Shout out to PerformaBuilt, by the way. I called those guys like 2 or 3 times and they dealt with my crap the whole time. But ultimately what they said was, you know, there was a Dexron 3 back in the day, then Dexron 6 came out, or 5 and 6, and it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Ultimately, use Dexron 3 or better. I asked them if, you know, if there's a problem with me using Dexron 6. They said no, should suffice. It's not a, as long as it's Dexron 3 or higher, shouldn't be a problem. So I guess my biggest question to them was the Dexron 6 is recommended for stock transmissions. I didn't know what they put in the transmission, if it would have some kind of negative effect with Dexron 6. They said no, go ahead and run it. I was like, okay. So here we are, putting in the Dexron 6. Now, one thing to note if you're doing this, and I don't know if you guys can see on camera, but I have fittings over there. Oh, those fittings there. Those are going to be running to my external transmission cooler that's going to have a fan on it and whatnot. Make sure you guys account for those lines and the fan, and the cooler, etc. when you guys are filling up the transmission. So if, you know, you look online and stock, it says that it holds, you know, 7 quarts. Just keep in mind to account for the cooler, because you don't want to run low on transmission fluid. I'm actually going to be running an external temp gauge for this transmission, and the fan itself will be activated based on temperature. So I think it's activated at 165 and it'll turn off at 180. So I'll be able to make sure that if I do have some kind of failure for the cooling of the transmission, I can at least monitor the temperature and make sure that I catch it before anything else happens. Alright, so as you can see, the transmission fluid slowly getting absorbed. Go ahead and put some more. This thing's gonna be heavy. It's already heavy. It's like 36, 37 pounds. And it's a 3200 stall, if I remember correctly. So it's actually a pretty good deal, because I bought the transmission and the torque converter, and if you buy both at the same time, you get a 2-year warranty for your transmission. So can't complain for that. Alright. I'm not sure where all this liquid is going, but it seems to be disappearing. Keep on going. A little bit more. I gotta tell you guys, out of all the fluids in a car that I hate dealing with, I think particularly the smell. Automatic trans fluid is probably one of my least favorite. I don't know what it is, but that smell is just awful. So is gear oil, but gear oil is not as bad as out of my trans fluid. So there you go, a few minutes. Rock it around. Alright, looks like we are ready to set this bad boy on there. There we go. There we go. I think we are good. So next step is to mount the transmission into the car. Check the clearances back here. Got some new bolts. Here's something interesting. I know the flex plate is fairly thin, but when you screw these guys in, I probably should have showed you guys this outside of the video. When you screw this in, you got a pretty good sized gap. If I can show you guys. I don't know if you can see that. But that's a pretty good sized gap. I'm pretty sure the flex plate is not that thick. So I'm probably going to put a washer to make sure that yeah, I'm gonna put a washer there to make sure that when I torque it down, that it torques down, clamping onto the flex plate, not physically into the what's it called, into the torque converter. So I thought I'd show you guys one more thing to verify that I forgot to show before I put the torque converter into the transmission. But let's just take a second to understand what I'm talking about here. So if you look at my old torque converter and the new torque converter, you'll notice there's a space below the tab. So if you look at the alignment shaft in the back, it sits on this. If you look here, there's a gap here, but it's very, very, very small. All right, not nearly as much as that. So what has to occur is this part back here centers inside the back of the crank, or I'm sorry, well, yeah, either the crank or the flex plate, depending on what you have. But if you don't have that, this guy will still press up against the flex plate, but it won't, the centering shaft won't be in the actual housing. So let me show you guys what I'm talking about here. So when you look up here, this here is for a reason, right? So your torque tail shaft, or whatever that thing is called, basically has to sit inside of here, and the tabs have to be touching. So you have your alignment, and then these are supposed to hold your torque converter on. What you want to do is, before you put this guy into your transmission and then just bolt it all up, verify that the alignment shaft actually goes into the back of the crank or your flex plate, depending on what you have. And if you look here, my flex plate is stepped, so I'm fairly confident that the length of this shaft here, with just this little guy, just a little space, is not enough. So what happened was, this guy is shipped with one of these spacers, and the way this works is essentially it just extends that shaft. So you put this guy on your torque converter and then this guy on the inside, so it looks something like this. So this guy goes in there, torque converter goes in there. All right. So make sure you do that. If you have a flex plate out for any reason, or if you're rebuilding your engine, this is easier to do outside. I usually just toss the torque converter on, spin it. I like to see that it's lined up, and it's a good workout, you know, it's chest day. So I'm going to show you guys what that looks like here. Install this guy on the back of it. If you are doing this, be very, very careful. The torque converter is very, very heavy. And as you can see, we are solid. So I'll have engagement there with the bolt there. So now when I put the transmission in with this torque converter, just got to make sure that I have enough clearance going back and forth into the transmission so I'm not bottomed out. So before I bolt that bolt and that bolt, I'm going to go ahead and check the spacing there, and then I'll bolt it up. And that's basically it for transmission install. Well, other than all the wiring and bolts, but that's simple. Install up all the fluids. I want to install a transmission temperature gauge. So what I have is one of these gauges here that I bought online, and it comes with this little temp probe here, and then you got your wires to hook up, and then you run your power, your ground, and then your signal wire. That's how you get the output here. What I'm doing here is, in order to get this guy in there, there is a port on the side of the transmission. I don't know if I can get my other transmission out right now, but there's a port on the, let's say, driver's side upper position that this screws into. That's not where this goes. That port is a pressure port, not a temperature port. So if you do hook it up to that port, you will not get accurate readings. This is coming from the transmission shop, PerformaBuilt, where I got my transmission. They actually test out all the transmissions before they send them out, and that is how they set the pressures or whatever they got to do with the transmission. They use that port. The guy told me you don't want to do that. Tap the pan and get the temperature from there. So I figured I'll do this. So I got one of these guys from online. I think it's just a, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe just like a temperature probe fitting. I don't know. But anyway, this guy bolts into this guy. It's got a Teflon washer, and it's got a nut. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tap it here on the corner, and then just put the washer in from the other side, put the pan back on, screw this guy in, obviously, put a little bit of Teflon tape on there, and then I'll have temperature. I'll be able to see my transmission temperature, as well as have another temperature controlled fan unit in the back of the remote transmission cooler to make sure that the transmission does not overheat. So I'm going to go ahead and tap that, put everything in, put it together. Shouldn't be very, very difficult. You actually just got to do a hole. I'm not going to do a hole and then try to screw it in. I'll just put a hole, get the nut from the other side over, maybe put some Loctite on there, what have you, and then go from there. We are currently looking at the finished product from underneath the car. I ran the wire, the power wire from the side of the car over along basically the top of the frame rail. As you can see here, it's the red wire. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but it's really, really tight trying to get the wire above and across the frame over here. In doing that, I also ran out of 10 gauge wire, so I had to opt for some speaker wire. It's 12 gauge. I just used both of the wires and put them together. It's not going to make a huge difference. I mean, it's going to be much larger, but it's not going to impact the capability of the wire simply because it's larger than necessary. So I ran the wire here to the one side of the switch, and then the other side of the switch, which, by the way, this is something that you buy when you get one of these guys. I'm sorry, you don't buy this. I think you actually get this with the kit. Pretty sure this comes with it. I could be wrong, but pretty sure this comes with it. Anyway, it's basically a switch. When you install your remote transmission cooler, you basically mount it. You run 2 of these lines. So I ran the line from my transmission all the way down there. Ran the lines above my drive shaft. You can see them up there. And got the inlet, outlet. Actually, I'm sorry, inlet, outlet. And you put this guy on the inlet. At least that's what the instructions say. I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference if you put in the outlet. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, what's going to happen is the moment this guy sees 180 or 200, it turns on the fan up until he sees 185, and then it turns off. So the way that works is you run a power wire to the switch, doesn't really matter which terminal. Then the other side of the terminal goes to the power wire for the fan, which is the blue wire. Then you take the black wire, which is the ground. You ground it. I didn't really feel like drilling in here, so I just removed this bolt, looked in there. There's some metal contact, so just went ahead, stripped the end of the wire, wrapped it around this bolt and tightened it. Should be a pretty good ground. If not, I'll drill a new one. And now I'm just going to go back under the hood, install the relay, and run this guy.